Hello everyone. Have you noticed Granny's hair is getting very long? I can't wait to get it cut, but I'll have to wait a little while longer. I'm going to read another story from the Big Book of Short Stories by Dick King-Smith. This one's called Use Your Brains. Little Basil Brontosaurus came home from his first morning at play school in floods of tears. "Whatever's the matter, darling?" said his mother, whose name was Araminta. "Why are you crying?" "They've been teasing me," sobbed Basil. "Who have? The other children?" A variety of little dinosaurs went to the play school. There were Diplodocuses, Iguanodons, Ankylosaurus, and many others. Basil was the only young Brontosaurus. "Yes," sniffed Basil. "They said I was stupid. They said I hadn't got a brain in my head." At this point, Basil's father, a 40-ton Brontosaurus, who measured 80 feet from nose to tail tip, came lumbering up through the shallows of the lake in which the family lived. "Herb," called Araminta, "did you hear that? The kids at play school said Aunt Basil hasn't a brain in his head." Herb considered this while pulling up and swallowing large quantities of waterweed. "He has," he said at last. "Hasn't he?" "Of course you have, darling," said Araminta to her little son. "Come along with me now and dry your tears and listen carefully." Still snivelling, Basil waded into the lake and followed his mother to a secluded inlet well away from the other dinosaurs that were feeding around the shallows. Araminta settled herself where the water was deep enough to help support her enormous bulk. "Now listen to Mummy, Basil darling," she said. "What I'm about to tell you is a secret. Every Brontosaurus that ever hatched is told this secret by his or her mummy or daddy once he or she is old enough. One day you'll be grown up and you'll have a wife of your own, and she'll lay eggs, and then you'll have babies. And when those babies are old enough, they'll have to be told just like I'm going to tell you." "Tell me what?" said Basil. "Promise not to breathe a word of it to the other children." "All right, but what is it?" "It is this," said Araminta. "We have 2 brains." "You're joking," said Basil. "I'm not. Every Brontosaurus has 2 brains, one in its head and one in the middle of its back." "Wow," cried Basil. "Well, if I've got 2 brains and all the other kids have only got 1, I must be twice as clever as them." "You are, darling," said Araminta. "You are. So let's have no more of this crybaby nonsense. Next time one of the children teases you, just think to yourself, 'I am twice as clever as you.'" Not only did Basil think this next morning at play school, but he also thought that he was twice as big as the other children. "Did you have a nice time?" said Araminta when he came home. "Smashing," said Basil. "No tears?" "Not mine," said Basil cheerily. "You didn't tell anyone our secret." There's a picture of him at Dinosaur Play School. "Oh no," said Basil. "I didn't do much talking to the other kids. Actions speak louder than words." Not long after this, the play school teacher, an elderly female Stegosaurus, came to see Herb and Araminta. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I'm a little worried about Basil." "Not been blubbing again, has he?" said Herb. "Oh no, he hasn't," said the Stegosaurus. "In fact, recently he's grown greatly in confidence. At first he was rather nervous and the other children tended to make fun of him, but they don't any more. Something seems to have given him a great deal of self-assurance. He's twice the boy he was." "Can't think why," said Herb, but Araminta could. "Indeed," went on the Stegosaurus, "I fear that lately he's been throwing his weight about. Boys will be boys, I know, but really Basil has become quite rough. Only yesterday I had to send home a baby Brachiosaurus with a badly bruised foot, and a little Trachodon with a black eye. I should be glad if you would speak to Basil about all this." When the teacher had departed, Araminta said to Herb, "You must have a word with the boy." "Why?" said Herb. "You heard what the teacher said. He's been bullying the other children. He's obviously getting above himself." At this point Basil appeared. "What did old Steggy want?" he said. "Tell him, Herb," said Araminta. "Now, look here, my boy," said Herb. Basil looked. You listen to me. Basil listened, but Herb, Araminta could see, had lost the thread of the matter. Your father is very angry with you, she said. You have been fighting at play school. That's right, said Herb, fighting at play school. Why? Well, it's like this, Dad, said Basil. The first day the other kids teased me. They said I hadn't got a brain in my head, remember? And then Mum told me I had. And another in the middle of my back, 2 brains. So I thought I'm twice as clever as the rest of them, as well as twice as big. So why not lean on them a bit? Not my fault if they get under my feet. You want to watch your step, said Herb. Daddy's right, said Araminta. One of these days you'll get into real trouble. Now run along, I want to talk to your father. It's all my fault for telling him about having 2 brains, she said when Basil had gone. He's too young. My parents didn't tell me till I was nearly grown up. How did you find out? Oh, I don't know, said Herb. I dare say I heard some of the chaps talking. Down in the swamp, when I was one of the gang, we used to talk a lot down in the swamp. What about? Said Araminta. Waterweed, mostly, said Herb, and he pulled up a great mouthful and began to chomp. Not long after this, Basil was expelled. I'm sorry, said the elderly Stegosaurus, but I can't have the boy in my class any longer. It isn't only his roughness, it's his rudeness. Do you know what he said to me today? No, said Herb. What? Said Araminta. He said to me, I'm twice as clever as you are. Is he? Said Herb. Of course he isn't, said Araminta hastily. He was just being silly and childish. I'm sure he won't be any trouble in the future. Not in my play school he won't, said the Stegosaurus. And then, oddly, she used the very words that Araminta had used earlier. One of these days, she said, he'll get into real trouble. And off she waddled, flapping her plates angrily. And one of those days Basil did. Being expelled from play school hadn't worried him at all. What do I want with other dinosaurs, he thought. I'm far superior to them, with my 2 brains, one to work my neck and my front legs, and one to work my back legs and my tail. Brontosauruses are twice as clever as other dinosaurs, and I'm twice as clever as any other Brontosaurus. You couldn't say that Basil was big-headed, for that he was almost the smallest part of him, but you could certainly say that he was boastful, conceited, and arrogant. That boy, said Araminta to Herb, he's boastful, conceited, and arrogant. He must get it from your side of the family, swaggering about and picking fights all the time. What does he think he is, a Tyrannosaurus Rex? What do you think you are? Basil was saying at that very moment. He had come out of the lake where the family spent almost all their time and set off for a walk. He was ambling along thinking what a fine fellow he was when he suddenly saw a strange, smallish dinosaur standing in his path. I think that's it there. It was not like any dinosaur he'd ever seen before. It stood upright on its hind legs, which were much bigger than its little forelegs, and it had a large head with large jaws and a great many teeth. But compared to Basil, who already weighed a couple of tons, it looked quite small, and he advanced upon it, saying in a rude tone, What do you think you are? I'm a Tyrannosaurus Rex, said the stranger. Never heard of you, said Basil. Lucky you. Why? What's so wonderful about you? You can't even walk on 4 feet like a decent dinosaur, and you've only got 1 brain. You'll be telling me next that you don't eat waterweed like we do. We don't, said the other. We only eat meat. What sort of meat? Brontosaurus, mostly. Let's get this straight, said Basil. Are you seriously telling me that you kill brontosauruses and eat them? Yes. Don't make me laugh, said Basil. I'm 4 times as big as you. Yes, said the youngster, but my dad's 4 times as big as you. Oh, look, what a bit of luck. Here he comes. Basil looked up to see a terrifying sight. Marching towards him on its huge hind legs was a towering, full-grown Tyrannosaurus Rex. In its forepaws it held the remains of the body of some wretched, smaller dinosaur, from which it tore mouthfuls with its battery of 6-inch teeth. All of a sudden, Basil had 2 brain waves. Time I went, he thought, sharpish, and as one brain sent a message rippling along to the other, he turned tail and made for the safety of the lake as fast as his legs could carry him. Like all his kind, he was slow and clumsy on land, and if his pursuer had not recently made a kill, Basil must surely have been its next victim. As it was, he reached the shore of the lake in time, and splashed frantically out to deeper water where his parents, their long necks downstretched, were browsing on the weedy bottom. Araminta was the first to look up. "Hello, darling," she said. "Where have you been? Whatever's the matter? You're all of a doodah." "Oh, mummy, mummy," panted Basil. "It was awful. I went for a walk and I was nearly eaten by a Tyrannosaurus rex." Herb raised his head in time to hear this. "That'll teach you," he said. "Teach me what, Dad?" "Not to be so cocky," said Araminta. "Ever since I told you that secret, you've been unbearable, Basil. I hope this will be a lesson to you." "Oh, it will, mummy, it will," cried Basil. "I won't ever shoot my mouth off again." "And don't go for walks," said his mother, "but keep close to the lake where you'll be safe from the Tyrannosaurus." And there they all are in the lake together. Is there any more? "In case he wrecks you," said Herb, and plunged his head underwater again, while strings of bubbles rose as he laughed at his own joke. "And if you want to grow up to be as big as your father," said Araminta, "there's one thing you must always remember to do." "What's that, mummy?" said Basil. "Use your brains." Well, that's an unusual story. I'll finish now and I'll send it to you, so bye for now.